So what if one of the most famous, most analyzed phrases in the Bible has been misunderstood for 2,000 years? Today we're diving into a really radical rereading of the resurrection, one that sees a famous command not as a moment of divine separation, but as something deeply, deeply personal.
Okay, so picture this. The garden, right after the resurrection. Mary Magdalene, who was his most devoted follower, sees Jesus and, of course, she reaches for him. But he stops her. He stops her with a phrase that has honestly puzzled theologians for centuries. Don't touch me. Now, this has always been seen as a moment of divine separation. But what if it's not a rejection at all? What if it's actually a declaration?
And that is the central question that our source for this explainer, the Maiden's Manifesto, puts on the table. It proposes that this isn't Jesus rejecting Mary, but something way more profound. It's a moment of self-declaration, a moment where Jesus is claiming a new and true identity.
All right, so here's how we're going to break down this pretty fascinating argument. First, we'll look at the source's unique starting point. Then we'll dissect that crucial phrase. We're even going to connect it to an unlikely piece of pop culture, and then unpack the main idea of an Easter coming out. From there, we'll explore what this means for Mary's transformation and the massive consequences this reading would have for the church.
To really get this interpretation, you have to start where the source material does, with this really powerful thought experiment. What if Mary Magdalene, the very first person to witness the resurrection, had become Pope Maria I?
So in this thought experiment, this papacy is one of just profound reform. Pope Maria would finally correct the centuries-old injustice of labeling Mary a sinner and restore her true title, the Apostle of the Apostles. She would open up all church offices to women, make celibacy optional, and, this is key for the whole argument, she would fully welcome LGBTQIA+ people into the church. This whole framework sets the stage for re-examining the Gospels from a perspective of radical inclusion.
Okay, so let's go back to that garden, back to that central mystery. Jesus is alive again. He's speaking to the woman who has been his most loyal companion. And his first words, they aren't a comfort, but a boundary. Why? What is going on here?
Well, the source points out that the original Greek text gives us a huge clue. Me mu hapto actually suggests stopping an action that's already in progress. So this isn't about forbidding contact forever, it's about changing the nature of the relationship. It's less a blanket, don't you ever touch me, and much more a specific, immediate plea. Stop clinging to the person I used to be.
And here is where the analysis takes a really fascinating and honestly unexpected turn. To understand this ancient moment of setting a boundary, the source turns to a very modern text, Lady Gaga's 2009 hit song, Alejandro. The source draws this just stunning parallel. In Alejandro, a woman has to let go of a man she loves because he can't love her back in the same way. His truth is with his men. The argument here is that this is the exact same dynamic happening in the garden. Jesus is setting a boundary, not out of coldness, but out of truth, so that he can ascend into his authentic self and begin his mission with his own men, the disciples. In both stories, love has to transform from possession into acceptance.
And all of this leads to the central, most provocative thesis of the source material. The resurrection of Jesus is his coming out. The act of rising from the dead becomes this powerful metaphor for rising into one's true, authentic identity, which, in this reading, is as a gay man who must now live in his truth.
The source shows just how deep this parallel really goes, reframing all these key Easter events as stages of a coming out journey. The rolled away stone, that's the burden of shame being lifted. The wounds that Jesus still carries, those are the transformed scars from past hurts. Being called by name, that becomes the moment of true recognition and affirmation. And that famous walk to Emmaus, well, that's the journey from a private realization out into a public community.
As the source puts it so powerfully, coming out is an Easter morning in one's own life. The stone of shame is rolled away, and a person stands up in the truth that makes them free.
But wait, if Jesus' story here is one of coming out, what does that make Mary Magdalene's story? Her journey becomes one of love, loss, and a really radical transformation. What does it mean to be the one who is asked to let go?
The source explores this by drawing another powerful modern parallel, the experience of women whose husbands or partners come out to them as gay. This really grounds the ancient story in a painful and very complex modern reality. And that shock is just profound. The source cites a study that found 78% of women in this exact situation were extremely shocked by the revelation. For many, The experience is like a grieving process, because the life and the partner they thought they knew is all of a sudden gone.
This emotional process, it often unfolds in phases. It starts with shock and grief, and that's often followed by anger, a sense of betrayal, and then this crippling self-doubt. And then finally, with time, comes the possibility of acceptance. This source really emphasizes that this journey can take years, not the cigarette-length pause for thought that's mentioned in the Lady Gaga.
So for Mary, in this interpretation, her role has to fundamentally change. That romantic, intimate connection she might have wanted is no longer possible. She has to grieve that loss. And then she has to transform her love. She becomes not his partner, but what the source calls his best friend. And, most importantly, the very first apostle, the messenger of his new truth.
So if we accept this reading, even just as a theological exercise, what does it actually mean for the Church? Well, according to the source, the consequences are nothing short of revolutionary.
First, it completely changes the concept of salvation, what theologians call soteriology. In this view, salvation isn't about conforming to a role someone else gives you. No, it's about the healing, the hail, that comes from living your authentic truth, just as Jesus does in this reading of the resurrection.
And it also transforms the very idea of the church, or ecclesiology. The church's role would shift from being a gatekeeper of one single truth to being a witness to Christ's presence in all people, in all their diversity, including queer bodies and relationships.
And ultimately, all this leads to a completely new sexual ethic. The focus shifts from the gender of the people in a relationship to the quality of that relationship. Is it based on truth, consent, fidelity, and care? In this view, same-sex relationships can be places of grace, and the church would be called to bless all loving couples, adopt gender-neutral language, and affirm so-called chosen families as true Christian communities.
So, in the end, this whole interpretation pushes us to ask a really powerful question. Can an ancient text about resurrection and divinity also serve as a mirror for our most modern questions of identity, of truth, and of the courage it takes to live freely? The source argues that not only can it, but that in doing so, we unlock a deeper, more inclusive understanding of what it really means to be saved by the truth.